Welcome to episode 261 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing Joseph Culp, who has been working as an actor for many, many years, and now he's written and directed a feature film called Welcome to the Men's Group. We talk through his process for making this movie happen, so stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Over the last 6 or 8 weeks or so, we actually got booted out of iTunes. It's kind of a long story, just had to do with the way that the podcast was tagged in the system. I did get it reinstated in there, so hopefully if you're listening to this through iTunes, you can now get those through a subscription. But any reviews, especially now, would be especially helpful in iTunes if you do listen to this through an iPad or an iPhone or anything like that, and you go through iTunes. If you have a minute, please do just take a minute and offer up some honest feedback for the podcast. It's very, very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts, and then just look for episode number 261. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing writer, director, and actor Joseph Culp. Here is the interview. Welcome, Joseph, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me this morning.
Happy to be here, Ashley. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure.
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
Well, I'm one of those strange, freaky people who grew up in show business. My father was a rather famous actor named Robert Culp. He was very popular in the 60s and 70s and 80s on a lot of big TV shows, very famous guy. And also, he also was quite an excellent writer and director. So I grew up in that world, in the, coming up through the 70s in LA. I was aware of, film sets and shooting and what that all meant. I lived with a guy, who was an actor and a filmmaker, essentially. So he also had a tremendous respect for writing. He was a writer. He sold many projects, especially to TV over the years. Even though he was more known, Robert Culp was more known as an actor, he was also a prolific writer. So that's kind of, I had that background, so there was some permission for me to be creative, to also become an actor and a writer. And also there was, a bar to kind of shoot for, because he had a lot of success.
Yeah. So what was your first steps to turning this into an actual career? Was it acting? Was it more on the writing front? Was it high school, doing some, theater in high school and then trying to get an agent and get commercials? Maybe you can talk through those sort of first steps to actually getting a career in the business.
Absolutely. So yeah, I was, I started acting probably in school plays around the age of 9. It was always part of something I felt was my calling. Through high school, did a lot of challenging work in the theater, and studied, and then got into college in New York. I went to NYU. I did the theater program. Then I started studying independently in the city as a young actor, and just went through the whole, learn as you go. It was all about acting. It was all about trying to be a good actor and live up to the kind of actors that I loved, that were my heroes. So this was all during sort of the early 80s. And so that was my biggest driving passion. At the same time, I was always a writer. I wrote stories, I wrote little plays, and I knew that there was something in that for me. But I have to say, trying to make my bones as an actor was always the foremost thing for many, many years, until I would say the early 90s. And then I started, looking around saying, okay, I've been working in some movies, some television, but, I've got this other passion, which is storytelling, in the sense of being a writer. And I started looking around at independent film, people are doing movies now on video cameras. It was during the Dogma years out of Denmark, where we saw films like The Celebration and these incredibly brilliant experimental pieces. And they were saying, listen, go tell a story. Don't wait around for people to give you money, So that really spoke to me, and I started doing that with my colleagues, people who were just out of film school, people who were also trying to get in the business. I made a feature film that took several years to complete with my dear friend Maria Geis, and it was an adaptation of a great Norwegian novel called Hunger. This is a very famous classic novel, and we adapted it for modern day Los Angeles. And we did everything. She wrote it, but I acted, produced, and we made this film together. And it became kind of like its own training ground, its own school. And I realized, I got to start doing this more. And so I started writing screenplays, stories I wanted to tell. I worked with partners, as screenwriting is one of the only partnered art forms I know of that actually works. And really, began cranking out stories and addressing myself to making films. And then I ended up making more independent films out of those screenplays. So that's a bit of a setup for Welcome to the Men's Group, which was my latest film, and what made me think that was going to be possible.
Yeah.
So it was by doing.
Yeah, so let's dig into Welcome to the Men's Group. Maybe to start out, you can give us a quick pitch or log line. What is that film all about? And then we'll dig into sort of the specifics of it.
So, Welcome to the Men's Group. The log line essentially is an oddball group of men meet in an all-male support group once a month, and on this particular day, conflicts between them, and one guy who's probably headed for a breakdown throw the group into chaos and threaten the very trust of the group. So it is decidedly, it's a comedy drama, and I emphasize it is a dramedy. It's a hybrid because it's about some very serious things that men deal with, but it's about a phenomenon called the men's group, which is a real thing, which is, guys getting together to actually talk about their feelings, not talk about not drinking beer and watching football, but actually trying to deal with the issues, and that can become both very poignant and also quite funny and absurd at the same time. So, and that was the genesis.
Okay, perfect. And so where did this idea actually come from? Are you in one of these men's support groups? Did you have friends in it? How did you even hear about it? And how did you kind of make that leap from, hey, there's this phenomena going on, and maybe that would be a good screenplay?
So absolutely. This is one of those screenplays that I have to say is not just a clever concept screenplay, which I have written a few of those. This is from my personal life. This is a personal work. It means that I have been involved in men's groups for nearly 20 years. I'm very passionate about the idea that men can do this, that we break the taboo of being stoic and tough, and men come together in these groups. I participated in them. I've been greatly inspired by them, and that's precisely what happened probably 7 or 8 years ago when I first thought about this. I said, I was in a group one day and I saw something happen between men that I thought was so wonderful and beautiful, fascinating, that I said, I wish I had a camera. I wish someone could witness what I just saw. And that if they did, they might see men in a whole different light. And it really did, I got to be honest, it came from that moment. And another guy in the group was sort of on the same wavelength, and he had a background in writing as well. And so we started talking, and we started meeting in coffee shops and saying, how could we make a film about a men's group that is not, I will say, not a typical satire that Hollywood would just make fun of it, but that actually would try to bring an audience into that experience where men are risking being vulnerable, saying things that you would never hear them say in public or to their wives or girlfriends. What if we could do that? And so that was really the moment that it happened, and we started crafting the screenplay out of that.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, by this time you've got a lot of experience as a producer, and the one thing that occurs to me as you pitch it is that it's very ripe to be a low budget film because you've got a very contained location. Most of the action is going to take place in this one house as they're having this support group. How much of that played into the idea or the I guess the excitement for actually writing this and getting it produced was just your producer hat, knowing you could get it produced fairly easily?
I always had an eye on that. My co-writer, and it is a co-written project, which I think was really appropriate in this case because, you need another man to kind of bounce around it, the story with and the characters and his experience as well. But I had produced movies. I've been doing low-budget independent films, and I thought, I want to do this. I want to write it, but, I want to direct it too. And so that was in the back of my mind. And the first thing that came to me is like, how can I make this, do it simply so that it's honoring the subject, but manageable. And I did think about that because, and as I think I mentioned earlier a little bit, the typical approach, if you were to pitch this to somebody, would be, hey, okay, let's make it a road trip movie. The guys go on a camping trip and they meet up with hookers and it becomes big, they rob a bank, and that's exactly what I said we're not going to do. We're not going to do. I'll make this even more of an experimental film if I have to. I really want to be in that room. That's the movie. I said that to my partner, and I said it to other people who said, well, I don't know. They were a little skeptical. I said, no, that's the movie. The movie is these guys in the room, which means it all takes place on a single day in a single house, in a location. It's a house movie. Call that a house movie, And house movies can work, There's been a lot of great ones. Forget House. Look at 12 Angry Men, which is a great play that became a movie. Look at The Boys in the Band, which is takes place in an apartment. Look at, half a dozen other, terrific movies that basically take place as a single event movie, on a day or in a location. And so, yeah, on a producerial level, I was thinking, we can keep it economical, we can do it like that, but this is a story, and I'll say this, underlining it, where that's appropriate. So you don't have to go to the mountains and go on a car trip and do The Hangover. You don't have to do that. Not for this story. This story is about men relating to each other or not relating, in conflict with each other. It's a drama, it's a play basically, and it takes place on this stage. So yeah,
I'm curious. I'm curious too.
That was
Again,
important.
yeah, for sure. No, and I totally get that. I'm curious too. Again, sort of with your producer hat on, how much of sort of the current political climate with the Me Too movement also played into this? I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of sort of redefining men's roles in society and these sorts of things. And movies and art. That's all going to be a part of that. How much of that sort of played into sort of the this being sort of timely?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Ashley. It actually, I want to say it didn't, which is to say that, we wrote the script before the big explosion happened, which was just last year with Me Too and Time's Up.
Mm-hmm.
That this moment we didn't foresee it happening, which is the timeliness of it just couldn't be better. Now the film is going to be released this week,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a film about men and male vulnerability and men, frankly, trying to redefine their masculinity. That's what, in many ways, the film is about. It's questioning that. It's like, well, who are we as men today? That's the essence of the movie. Is like, well, we're not the men that, of our father's generation or our grandfather's generation.
Mm-hmm.
We are dealing with women who are empowered. We are dealing with changing roles of men in society. So all of that was very relevant for me and Scott Ben-Yashar, my co-writer. We knew that just by participating in these groups some years ago. Mm-hmm. But and as we wrote it, we thought about, said, we are writing this too as this wonderful possibility that women could see into this world, this private world of men talking, mm-hmm. And revealing themselves. Yeah. So we were conscious of that part of it, and I will say happily that a lot of our audiences in screenings and festivals are resoundingly enthusiastic. Are the women? Mm-hmm. They love the movie because they get to see into that place. They always want to see men be more vulnerable, more empathetic in a certain way, and that the movie is all about that. Yeah. But the thing that happened just last year, which is redefining everything, Me Too and Time's Up and everything around it, we didn't know that was going to happen, and the movie was already shot. Mm-hmm. So it was one of those. I want to say maybe we were being prescient. We were being like, seeing like there's relevancy about this movie even before that happened, mm-hmm. and now I think I hope it's even more relevant.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's dig into
exciting.
So let's dig into your writing process. Maybe to start out, we can talk about your collaboration with Scott. Maybe you can just describe like how that actually looks. Are you guys in the same room? It sounds like early on you guys are just in the coffee shop spitballing ideas. At some point, you must be getting a little more formal, creating an outline. Maybe you can just sort of walk through that process. Did you guys divide up scenes and then bring those scenes together and rewrite them? Just all about how you collaborated with Scott.
Sure. Every collaboration is different. Mm-hmm. I definitely collaborated on a half a dozen other scripts with different friends and writers. We have different processes. Sometimes we're in the room. I always say one guy is on the computer, one guy is walking or pacing. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes you trade off. Yeah. And you kind of bounce back and forth. And again, I love to mention that awareness that for me writing screenplays is it might be, besides songwriting, it might be the only form of writing that people can do together really well. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those things. Maybe it's because it's a dynamic, it's a dialogue, it's something like that, but you don't write novels together. Mm-hmm. And you don't write poetry together, but screenplays you can, mm-hmm. and it's even benefits by writing together. So when Scott and I started, we're both a bit old school. It's like, well, we'll meet for coffee, and we started. So someone recently said, Welcome to the Men's Group has a style. Someone said it's slightly caffeinated, meaning it's very, hyper, mm-hmm. energetic quality to it. And I said, well, that's funny because we met in coffee shops when we wrote it. We started out, as you said, by spitballing, by looking at, okay, what is a character-driven piece? It's not a clever story ploy. It's all going to come out of character. It's about who the guys are and what's going on in their lives, and that's going to define what happens in the story. And that's a very different, as you know, there's a character-driven piece, and then there's pieces that are completely concept-driven. There can be stories about, whatever, a historical piece, or it could be about, what if aliens landed in Los Angeles, or it was the end of the world, and that's a concept. This is about these characters. So the first thing we did was decide who are our guys, who are they based on, what parts of ourselves can we relate to about that. It's not an autobiographical film or story, but it is, a lot of stuff is taken from either our own experiences or parts of our own lives. So we were willing to do that. And we came up with 8 archetypes, 8 guys. And we said they're archetypes. And we won't even call them by their names yet because we don't know their names. Instead, we're going to call them by what defines them. Mm-hmm. So there was Mr. Needy, who's a guy who always needs to talk and wants a lot of love and can't seem to get it, either from women or from the guys in his men's group. There's Mr. Sex, who's the guy who's always talking about he's a self-avowed sex addict. That was the role I played in the film, meaning that he's in recovery and everything somehow funnels through that prism or shines through that prism in his life. His betrayals, his wife, all of that. And sexuality is kind of big on his. There's another guy who's I think we called him Comedy Man at first. He's a guy who's always making jokes, and he jokes to joke away his fear. He jokes to cover up what he's been doing, in his life financially, where he's ripped off his wife and her family to try and a big business scheme. There's another guy who's the list goes on. The lawyer whose whole life is mortgaged around this house. His wife is depressed. His daughter, he doesn't have much of a relationship. He's done his whole life. He's worked to build this amazing mansion of a house, and yet nobody's there. He wakes up that day, his wife's not even home. And, we're trying to get at ideas such as what are men doing specifically in America and the American dream, and also universally, how they suffer in private ways that people don't know about. But we started with archetypes and we named them all and wrote as many notes as we could about what was going on in their lives. And then we started saying this guy could be the guy who's going to have a breakdown. And he ends up doing things in the group on this morning that basically hijacked the group. And so we knew that was going to be part of the story. Something has to happen. Okay, it can't just be, we're not making a documentary. We're not, I will say that I said to Scott early on, I said, if we're brave enough, this will be like a great film from the early 80s called My Dinner with Andre, which was 2 guys talking. It kind of blew the lid off of independent film. Nobody thought that was possible. And My Dinner with Andre is a great film. If no one's seen it, please go and rent it and see it immediately. It's one of the great independent films of the early 80s. And it was simply Andre Gregory and Wallace Shawn talking in a restaurant about, and what they talk about is everything, is the whole world. And it's the most compelling film in the world. And I said, let's be willing to even do that. These guys will do long monologues. They will trigger each other. Things will happen. And it will all come out of what they need in their lives and how that might play out on a single morning. So, one guy turns out he's he's lost his wife, he's lost his money, he's really on the edge, and he's probably suicidal. So we were using that as a potential, conflict. And another guy, his wife is severely depressed and doesn't know where she is on this morning. That's playing on him, but he's hosting the men's group in his house. So and then two guys have a long-standing argument going on that's going to boil to the surface. And on top of that, one guy's going to have a secret that might jeopardize his whole position in the group or even his place there. Mm-hmm. So out of, studying, really spending time with these characters, many of which we pulled from, I will say there are mixtures of people we've known and maybe parts of ourselves. And it was an interesting way to work because, we didn't really have the typical outline. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a first, second, and third act outline to begin with. What happened is we distilled that out of understanding who we wanted to show in the film, mm-hmm. what kinds of guys we wanted to show. So it was kind of working in reverse in some ways.
Yeah. So let's go to the next phase. You guys have written this screenplay. What were those next steps to actually raising money and bringing this thing into production?
No. Well, they're in struggle that always besets every writer, filmmaker, person. Oh my God, it's, mm-hmm. I think, we spent a couple of years trying to find ways to finance it. Mm-hmm. We certainly did send it to various people, but I kind of knew in the back of my head, this is something we're going to have to cobble together, and maybe even figure out a way to shoot it, for next to nothing if we can. Because sometimes there are projects that are close enough to your heart that you just have to do that. I've done it a couple of times already, so I wasn't afraid of that. But we did some budgets. I looked at it and said, I really think we can do it for this, and keep it below there are different tiers in the SAG agreements. And finally, after, pounding the pavement quite a bit, I will just have to say we got lucky, mm-hmm. Where someone that was, well, frankly, in part related to us, mm-hmm. Was willing to make us a loan. And that's a big chance you take with an independent film, Mm-hmm. Can you pay that loan back? How long will it take to pay it back?
Yeah. And maybe there's some,
I don't recommend this to everybody.
Yeah, no, for sure. And maybe you could just give some
what
general...
I do recommend is
going... Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, what I do recommend is don't let the financial stuff stop you. Mm-hmm. There's got to be a way to make your film, especially if you've written it in such a way that it's fairly economical. Mm-hmm. So that's something I just want to put out there because I think we spent way too much time trying to find the money. Mm-hmm. Have to try and find the money. Who could be in this? But there are ways, especially today with all this awesome technology. And I say that like an old person, but there's such great cameras, there's great editing software. And if you can put I've shot short films for zero, for nothing, just by getting people who wanted to be part of it, Yeah. So never let the money part stop you. In our case, we got enough and we made a schedule and we found a line producer and we said, okay, we can do this. But that's the next part of the story is how did we pull it off for that much money and for that amount of time? And I can continue with that if you want.
Yeah. That was let's end it there because you've been very generous with your time and we're at the 30-minute mark. Maybe you can just give a quick plug to Welcome to the Men's Group. How can people see it? Do you know what the release schedule is going to be like?
So thanks, man. Welcome to the Men's Group is gonna first we did a premiere We've had a number of screenings in the U.S. and Europe.
Nice.
We'll continue to do those screenings theatrically, but the VOD begins, the first wave of VOD begins this Friday.
Okay.
It should be available on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon, and a bunch of, I want to say, cable systems. Will have it available. So please go look for it. Welcome to the Men's Group. It stars Stephen Tobolowsky, who's just everybody knows him. He's been in 1,000 movies, from Groundhog Day, Ned Ryerson, everybody knows him, to Californication, the Goldbergs. The guy is like everywhere, and he does some stuff in this movie. Go look at the trailer online. You will not believe what he does.
I saw the trailer and I didn't believe it.
He redefines the words brave actor. He's a star in this film. Timothy Bottoms, who is a veteran from Last Picture Show, Paper Chase from the 70s. This guy gives one of the greatest performances of his career in this movie, without question. Dave Clennon, who is in The Thing and Gone Girl, a guy's been around forever. Mackenzie Aston, I'm in there too. If you don't know me, I played the father of Don Draper on Mad Men, and I was the first Doctor Doom in the Fantastic Four. It's an amazing ensemble cast, and you don't see that too often, where equally all these actors are doing incredible work.
Yeah.
So please check it.
Yep, and I will put all that in the show notes, so people can check out the trailer and maybe go to iTunes and Amazon and rent it or purchase it. What's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? Twitter, Facebook, a blog, anything you're comfortable sharing. I will also round that stuff up for the show.
Oh, thanks very much. Certainly, friend me on Facebook. I'm always posting stuff that I'm doing, and about the movie, about other stuff I do. I got things coming up, and I also have a website. josephculp.com is my website. You can see more stuff about me there. YouTube, and please, friend me on Facebook. I love to have more friends and connect with everybody.
Perfect. Joseph, again, I really appreciate your time coming on and talking with me. Good luck with this film, and good luck with all your future films.
Thank you, Ashley. Really appreciate it. Great talking to you.
Hey, you too. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, character, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write your logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline and synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your screenplay gets a recommend or a consider from one of our readers, you get to list the screenplay in the SYS Select database, which is a database for producers to find screenplays and a big part of our SYS Select program. Producers are in the database searching for material on a daily basis, so it's another great way to get your material in front of them. As a further bonus, if your script gets a recommend from one of our readers, your screenplay will get included in our monthly Best Of newsletter. Each month we send out a newsletter that highlights the best screenplays that have come through our script analysis service. This is a monthly newsletter that goes out to our list of over 400 producers who are actively looking for material. So again, this is another great way to get your material out there. So if you want a professional evaluation, of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Vladimir D. Fontenay, who just did an indie drama called Mobile Homes. This is a good example of a film that the filmmaker first made as a short film and then was able to expand it into a full-length feature film. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's the show. Thank you for listening.